Have you got any plans for holiday reading? If not, let me encourage you with a couple of books that I've been reading this year that I've found really good. Let's talk about it. Hey, I'm Darryl Burling from Master New Testament Greek, here with the tools, habits and systems to help you to master the Greek of the New Testament. Now, normally I do stick to the subject of Greek, but this video is a little different, and what I'm going to do in this video is just take you through some of the key books that I've read this year, introduce them to you and encourage you to give them a read as well. So with that, let me just start by saying that we are kind of a product of the reading that we do. We are what we read in a sense, right? And I think historically, Christians have always been the kinds of people who do engage in reading, perhaps more so than other people, primarily because God gave to us His Word, His revelation of Himself in written format. And so we take that, we read it, and of course that provides a lot for us in order that we can read, we can understand, and then of course we write books about the book, and we write books about the language the book is written in, and all these kinds of things as well. So there's lots of opportunities to learn by reading, and reading as a skill is actually really important. It's different to listening to an audiobook. I listen to audiobooks. I enjoy listening to audiobooks. But what I find is that there are certain types of audiobooks that lend themselves more to audio and other books that lend themselves more to, being read properly. For instance, if you're going to read a philosophy book or you're going to read a book on theology, those typically don't do as well in audio format. Now I've done this before, read the physical book and then go through the audio version at the same time, and that's really beneficial. But on the other side, if all you're doing is listening to books, it's a different skill and you do a different kind of reading to just actually reading the book. Anyway, I wasn't going to talk about all of that, but I think it is helpful to remember that we are a product of the kinds of things that we spend our time and our thoughts doing. And reading is a really valuable activity for Christians particularly, but for anybody really. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to introduce you to some of the best books that I've read this year. As you know, probably, I read quite widely. I read a variety of different books on a variety of subjects, and some of these are good and some of these are less good. So what I want to do today is I want to introduce you to really 4 books that I've read this year. And these 4 books are the best book overall that I've read this year, the most surprising book I read this year, the most significant book for me personally this year, and then the worst book I read this year as well. And so I'm interested in hearing from you. Tell me what your best, most surprising, most impactful, and worst book of the year you've read is in the comment section below as well. I'd love to hear, and even if you just pick one of those, that's fine. Just leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to. I'm always taking a lot of what I read from other people's recommendations, so I'm interested in what you have to say down there as well. Having said all that, there are other books that I do read. I read 50 to 60 books most years. It's more just over a book a week. And most of them are non-fiction. This year I did actually read the Harry Potter series all over again. Actually, I think I might have read the Chronicles of Narnia as well. I can't remember now. Maybe that was last year. I can't remember. Anyway, if you are interested in following what I read, then you can sign in and follow my Goodreads account, which you'll find in the description below as well. So with that, let's get into the books that I've read this year, and particularly let's start with the best book overall that I read this year. Now, there's been a number of really good books that I've really enjoyed reading this year. For instance, I really enjoyed James Jeffers' The Greco-Roman World of the New Testament Era. That was a really interesting book, a book really on the culture and history of the first century period. Really, really interesting. And we got this recommendation really from Dr. Michael Haken, who was on Master New Testament Greek. He joined us for a community call a little while ago, and he recommended this book. So we read this in Master New Testament Greek earlier this year, and this was a really good book. This is not the best book I read overall, but it's an honorable mention. And again, it's just a really helpful book to help us understand kind of some of the background to the New Testament period. The best book, though, that I read this year was also another book we read as part of Master New Testament Greek, and that was Reading Scripture with the Church Fathers by Christopher Hall. Now, Christopher Hall's written a number of these books in this series. There's some on reading theology and all these kinds of things, but I really enjoyed this book because he does a a wonderful job, really, of explaining the difference between the Antioch and Alexandrian approaches to interpreting the scriptures. And if you don't know the argument there, in Antioch, they tended to be more literal in their approach to the interpretation, and a lot of evangelical professors and teachers and scholars today would see themselves as following in that path. But then on the other side, you've got the Alexandrians who tended to spiritualize the text quite a lot. And what I really appreciated about the book, this particular book, is that Christopher Hall does a great job, I think, of explaining why they spiritualized the text the way they did. And their answers and their explanations and their purpose was very much evangelical and apologetic. And when we see that, we can start to follow along with their reasoning. Not that we necessarily have to endorse it or anything like that, but it was really interesting to see that even though they spiritualize the text, they still hold to a literal interpretation, but then they use the spiritual interpretation to really reach their own time and place and community. And that's really interesting. And again, we don't have to buy into that methodology, and I think there's good reasons not to do that. But still, this is a very interesting insight into the heart of those early Alexandrian scholars particularly, and also a great insight into some of the great Antiochian, if you like to call it that, scholars as well. So I really appreciated this book, and this was my personal favorite book that I read this year as well. What was your favorite book you read this year? Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to read your favorite book as well. Maybe I've already read it, I don't know, but I'd love to hear from you down in the comment section below. Now, the other thing I just want to say before we move on, if you like this, then hit the like button on this video just to let me know that this is a helpful video and to help others to find this video as well. Let me go back to the most surprising book that I found that I read this year. And this is one that I'm still finishing up. I haven't quite finished it yet, but when I started it, I thought, you know what, this is probably going to be way off in so many areas. This book is written by a post-millennial theonomist. Now, I am not post-millennial, nor am I a theonomist. Very much in quite a different camp in a lot of ways. But I've read a lot of philosophy and worldview over the years, and I really appreciate philosophy and worldview. And so this book, Mission of God, written by Joseph Boot, was a real surprise to me. Now, he's arguing from that post-millennial theonomist point of view, but I don't think, personally, as you read through this book, he's building out really good arguments for a whole variety of areas of Christian living that I don't think it's easy to actually argue against. But I don't think you have to buy into post-millennial theonomists, theonomy, to actually hold to these positions. I think they're just a result of good theology. So this book really surprised me. And the more I read it, the more I appreciate many of the positions he's taken. Now, that doesn't mean, again, I agree with everything in this book. I don't. But for the most part, everything he's arguing in this book are just the kind of things we as Christians should have as part of a comprehensive Christian worldview, as a part of just seeing how the world works, how we function within the world, and so on and so forth. And so that's really how I would encourage you, if you're going to read this book, to read it. Now, it's not small. This is a 600+ page tome. It's kind of large, but it is really good, and it does give you an overview of a whole bunch of things like Christian education, apologetics, politics, and things like that, and just how should we as Christians think about these things. Now, again, as a post-millennialist, he's thinking that we're going to bring in the kingdom bit by evangelism and things like that, so that Christ returns and reigns over the earth in that, after we've already done that kind of work with him working through us and so on. Now, I don't agree with that position, but again, we don't have to hold that that's going to be the case to actually agree with a lot of things he says. So this is a really good book, and it was the most surprising book that I read this year, because I thought, I'm just going to disagree with a whole lot of this, but no, it's actually really, really good. And if you can separate his thinking from his theonomy and post-millennialism, which I think is really easy because I don't think he draws a really hard line between those two things, then this is a well worthwhile book to read. Now, let's move on to the third book, and this is the book that is the most significant for me personally. Now, if you've been watching my videos throughout this year, this probably won't be a big surprise for you. One of the things when I was growing up, and even into my early 20s, I really didn't have any idea how to deal with money or think about money or the financial system or any of those things. And I've read a number of super helpful books over the years that have been just life-changing in helping me to think through that. Not all Christian, in fact, very few of them are Christian books. I probably need to read more Christian books, but there's some really good ones that I've found very, very helpful. One of them this year was really more on terms of economics generally, and this has been sprung loaded for me by the whole coronavirus and the economic impact of that, and then money printing, quantitative easing, and all that kind of stuff. I've been trying to think, how do you avoid the issues of inflation as an individual, as a business owner, and those kinds of things. And while there's no sure way to avoid that, one of the books I have really benefited from greatly this year, and this was one I read very early in the year, was The Bitcoin Standard. This book's really interesting. It's not written by a Christian. In fact, I think he may even be Muslim. But nonetheless, this is a great book which explains, he's an economic professor, so he's no slouch when it comes to understanding economics and things like that. And that's really where I came from as I read this book. I've read about 10 or 11 books on economics now, and this one's been probably one of the most impactful that I've read personally in the way I think now about finances, the way I think specifically, more specifically really, about saving and investment and those kinds of things as well. So I would encourage The Bitcoin Standard if you haven't already read this. If you want something smaller, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in another video, the Thank God for Bitcoin is a much smaller book, and it gives you a lot of the points that are in this, but I think this is just better fleshed out, and it doesn't have that kind of anti-government, well, it does kind of have that, I guess, but it doesn't purport to be Christian, which I think carries a bit of a problem with that anti-government kind of sentiment as well. Nonetheless, this is a great book, and I found this really impactful, and if you are interested in more books that I've read on economics, then you're probably not, right? Because this is a channel for Christians on Christianity and stuff, and probably the Greek verb revisited or you know, reading scripture with the church fathers is much more of what you're kind of here for. But nonetheless, I found this really impactful, and I want to encourage you to give it a read if you're interested in how to avoid some of the fallout from the economic turbulence that we're going through right now. Finally, I want to bring you to the worst book that I've read this year. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's the worst book you've ever read? Leave it in the comment section below and let me know, why was that the worst book? For me, when I get to a book that is a good book, it's going to be well written, well reasoned in argument. I don't have to agree with everything in it, but it's going to be well written, well argued. It's going to be balanced, and it's going to be fair. I read a lot of business books. This one is really more of a business book, and it's called Thursday is the New Friday. The benefit of the title is it's trying to teach you that take Thursday as the last day of the week, and then take a 3-day weekend. Work 40 hours if you want to, or work 30 hours during those 4 days, whatever you want to do, but take a 3-day weekend, get yourself a bit more refreshed and so on. And the premise behind that I really like, and this is a little bit of a trend amongst kind of modern business writers to try and encourage people to work fewer hours, be more impactful with their hours. And I think there's a lot of credibility to this. I think Michael Hyatt's book, Win at Work and Succeed at Life, is really the best book that I've read on this so far. But nonetheless, this book, the title promised a lot, and I had high expectations going into it, but it was terrible as a book. The book actually almost didn't even connect with the title. I was expecting this sort of how to make Thursday the new Friday, and he kind of does that, but the way he does it is he doesn't connect the dots between the title and the outcome and each chapter as you go through. So as you're going through, you're left wondering, what's this got to do with the title? What's this got to do with the reason I chose to purchase this book in the first place? And on top of that, he's got some really poor research arguing that a 7-day work week came from, I can't even remember where, it was somewhere Eastern or something like that, which was bizarre from my point of view, arguing even that that's why we got a 7-day, a 5-day work week. It's just, some of the reasoning here was just off. He was just obviously not very historically astute, doesn't know his stuff when it comes to, how we got our work week and some of the how Christianity has impacted the world today and things like this. And those kinds of things just annoy me, because it's like, if you really should know at least the basics of the world you live in and how your world, the country you live in, got to be where it is. Now, this guy lives, as far as I know, in the United States, so it's not like he's got a good excuse. So this was just poorly written, poorly researched, and the material you take away just seems to go on and on and on. It's not well written. So this is not a good book. Don't buy this book. Don't read this book. Look at the title. That's all the benefit you'll probably get from the book, because the title is fantastic. the rest of the book just doesn't deliver. So that's my best and my worst for 2021. I'd love to hear from you. What did you find really good this year? What was the best book you read? What was the worst book? What was the most surprising book? And what book has impacted you the most this year as well? Leave a comment in the comment section below. If you are interested in joining us as we read through a number of these books in Master New Testament Greek, you can do that by just downloading the roadmap to mastery at masterntgreek.com/roadmap. And when you do that, you'll go on to our mailing list. We'll tell you all about the membership. And if you're interested in joining, you can do so there. So with that, thanks so much for watching. I always enjoy sharing with you some of these things, and I hope this has been a blessing to you. Keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. We'll see you then.